First up, though, it is day 2 of Sidney Moore's obstruction of justice trial. He's the man charged with kidnapping Heather Elvis, the Saukesty woman who disappeared in December of 2013. And right now, he sits before a judge and a jury to determine if he misled detectives and hindered their investigation into what happened to Heather. WMBF News anchor Caitlin Stansel is following the latest developments in this case live from outside the courtroom. Caitlin.
Michael, yeah, right now we're in about a 10-minute recess, but when court resumes, the witness that's on the stand right now, his name is Will Lynch. He's a detective with North Myrtle Beach, but back in the time that Heather disappeared, he was qualified to use this program called Cellbrite. Now, what that would do is it could extract text message content from a cell phone. We haven't heard exactly whose text messages we're going to be looking at when they get back from break, but this is going to be a very big part of this case. The prosecution and defense were talking to the judge about all of this right before we went into recess. But now let's take a look back at what happened this morning. We heard from the lead investigator that was on this case when Heather disappeared. Now, his name was Jeff Cobble. He detailed what he learned from the very first conversation between detectives and Sidney Moore at the Horry County Police Department. And we also heard for ourselves that conversation because that audio was recorded on December 20th, 2013, and then played for the jury today. This isn't new evidence. We had heard this earlier this month during a pretrial hearing when the defense had asked to suppress this interview. In it, Sidney Moore was asked if he used a payphone to call Heather Elvis the night that she went missing. At first, Sidney said no, even questioning if payphones still exist. But detectives then tell him they have a video of a payphone on 10th Avenue and ask again if he called her. He says maybe, and then yes, and that he asked her to please leave him alone and stop leaving notes on his car. Cobble says this is just one example of Sidney misleading detectives in this investigation.
Tell this jury what you would have done different.
We would have been able to start on this investigation earlier than what we did. If the information would have come out during the sergeant's first phone call, that we learned during our interview, he would have, as he testified, called us out. CID would have been called out. Would we have been able to find more evidence or we would definitely have been able to get to the evidence quicker. We would have been able to get to an interview with him quicker. Do I know exactly what we would have found at that point? No, but I know that it's always best to get the investigation started as fast as possible.
In that recorded conversation with Sidney, Sidney says that his wife Tammy was with him the entirety of the night. And at one point they had stopped at Walmart. Sidney had gone in and bought a pregnancy test because him and his wife were trying to get pregnant. He also told detectives he and his wife had stopped multiple times during that night and had sex in multiple locations. But then he also said later in that conversation that his wife Tammy had been drinking that night. Live in Conway, Caitlin Stansel for WMBF News.
Okay, Caitlin, thanks for all those details tonight. Now, a little bit more for you. This morning, Sidney Moore's wife, Tammy Moore, made a quick appearance before Judge Markley Dennis. We've got video from a previous court appearance as well. You may remember that she's also charged with kidnapping in connection to Heather's disappearance. And while she's been waiting on her trial and supporting her husband through this, she was recently accused of violating that gag order on the case. We told you a few weeks ago about a motion that claims Tammy posted about facts of the case, a witness's credibility, and comments about Heather's family. The state has requested a hearing on this issue, and today, for a second time, it was continued. The judge said a pretrial hearing was held, and it was determined the matter needed to be investigated further. It appears former U.S. Attorney for South Carolina, Bill Nettles, is one of the attorneys representing Moore for this matter.
The heavy rain from yesterday has come to an end, but the clouds still hanging on tight. We're starting to get a few breaks inland along the Grand Strand, basically overcast, holding the temperatures down. Air
believe Sidney impeded their investigation into what happened to Heather. WMBF News anchor Caitlin Stansel was live now outside the courtroom. Caitlin.
Sidney's kidnapping trial. Michael, the lead investigator in this case is Jeff Cobble, and he said today that when he first talked to Sidney Moore at the Horry County Police Department, Sidney was not considered a suspect in Heather's disappearance just yet. He said Sidney came to the department voluntarily, he wasn't being arrested, and that he could have left at any time during that interview that was recorded. Now, Cobble says he had noticed that things started to not add up in what Sidney was saying, and that's when he began questioning what was really the truth in Sidney's story. But it would still be 2 months from that time before Sidney was arrested for obstruction of justice. Cobble believes Sidney withheld information during that initial interview that could have been crucial to the case and cost detectives time and money and impeded their investigation.
If somebody spits in my coffee, I'm not going to try to drink around it. I'm going to assume that all the coffee is contaminated. So I'm going to throw that coffee away and I'm going to get me a new cup of coffee. In this case, if someone lies to us in an investigation, we're assuming that everything else is a lie as well until we figure out if it's the truth or not.
The defense tried to pick apart the detectives' investigative work in this, questioning why they didn't ask about specific things. Now, some of that was something that Cobble revealed during his testimony. He said that Sidney was actually near or at Heather's residence the night that she disappeared, and also at a restaurant called Longbeard's, where we know Heather had been from her cell phone records. Now, the defense asked the detective why they didn't ask specifically about that, and the detective said that Sidney did not even bring it up during that initial investigation. Live from Conway, Caitlin Stansel for WMBF News. Sidney Moore's obstruction of justice trial is finished for the day, and while many witnesses spoke, Heather Elvis's former roommate was not allowed to share some of her testimony. We'll tell you why coming up.
Plus, one school district in our area is taking a proactive approach to keeping its student athletes safe. What athletic trainers are doing to help the kids stay healthy.
And new at 6, a reward offered for any information leading to the arrest of suspects in the carjacking and shooting of an elderly woman last night at the PD. What people in the area are saying about that incident. WMBF News at 6 starts right now. Day 2 of Sidney Moore's obstruction of justice trial just wrapped up less than an hour ago. We heard from several witnesses today and also listened to the first conversation Sidney Moore had with the Horry County detectives at the police department. WMBF News anchor Caitlin Stansel has been following this case from the courtroom. She's live from the Government and Justice Center with the latest developments. Caitlin?
Michael, one of those witnesses that we heard from today was Brianna Worrelman. She was Heather Elvis's best friend and roommate when Heather went missing. And today she was asked about the very last phone conversation she had with Heather in the very early morning hours of December 18th, 2013. Now, you may remember during Sidney Moore's kidnapping trial that ended in a hung jury last June, Brianna detailed what Heather said to her during that conversation. But today, the defense objected to that same testimony being used for this obstruction of justice trial that Sidney is on trial for this week. And the judge ruled that he would not allow it this time around.
Because all of this is really, the obstruction of justice is incidental to what really this is about, and we all know that. And that's, the jury doesn't, and they're not going to consider that. They're going to decide this case based on this crime and this crime alone. There's another day for the other part.
We also heard from a phone records expert who told us about how many text messages and phone calls were made between Heather Elvis's cell phone and Sidney Moore's cell phone. Now, he really focused in on the time period between July 17th and December 18th and said that there were hundreds of contacts between those two cell phone numbers during that time. Now, everything gets started back up at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and we will have the very latest developments as we follow this trial from the courtroom. Live in Conway, Caitlin Stansel for WMBF News. The obstruction of justice trial for Sidney Moore is in its second day of testimony, and coming up, I'll tell you what investigators say led to his arrest for that charge.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us for WMBF.